welcome to the second IMU government account position of IMUN.
Inside government, we think an obvious disparity exists within Malaysia, right? Where people are subjected to living lives enclosed in only the lower chapters of society, right? When you live a life in this chapter, money is a luxury, right? Job opportunities are rare, and education is subpar most of the time, right? This is because we believe, right, inside government, that the wealth of the country is generally being circulated and only controlled by the upper classes and chapters of society, right? And only being circulated in those areas. Now, how could you, as a citizen in Malaysia, choose not to be subjected to living in these subpar conditions? Well, only through the birth lottery. We think that's unfair. We don't like that. We're going to change that, right? People in a country like in Malaysia, right, are subjected to these inequalities. Now, if you're not born into a wealthy, per se, Malay family, you're not going to enjoy these benefits of financial capabilities and these Bumiputra rights, right? We think that that's unfair, right? Especially the monetary part. Now, sure, in capitalist societies like Malaysia, it allows you to climb the social ladders of society. However, we think as the state, we think it's always our duty to help the lower class society try to climb these ladders even better, right? Now, our mechanism is quite simple, right? We're going to target the elite classes that have these inheritance, right? So when like your father has a big lump sum of money and it's passed down to your son, we're going to take a small portion of that money, right? Now, why just them? We think it's justified, right? We think, especially in Malaysia, it's already justified, right? Like even in our income tax, right? Like we only tax the people who earn 48,000 ringgit and above, right? It was before GST, we only taxed 24,000 ringgit and above. But even in then, we see that the government already has a nature to specifically tax a particular bunch of people, right? Now, this is subject to change, our policy, right? It's subject to judiciary judgment. So let's say, per se, if there was a reason that the elites actually needed that money, there was one family that couldn't give up the inheritance, then maybe the courts can decide, and we're not going to be as stringent as that, right? It's going to be a flexible system, but still an effective system. Sit down, right? Now, specific percentage will be decided according to a case-by-case basis. The money will then be, and this is important, right? Listen up, will be redistributed to the poor, right? We'll redistribute to maybe FRIM benefits, we'll distribute to, monetary assistances, education, right? Now, there is a concession from side of the government, right? Yes, this directly benefits the elite class, right? Now, however, we do think that this is legitimate, right? For two reasons. One, it's not that detrimental, right? To take money from a person that is very poor is going to be even more detrimental than taking money from a person that is incredibly rich, right? So we think that it's less detrimental on our side, right? But lastly, we think it's going to produce and yield a lot of utility, right? Because I'm going to tell you later the benefits of our policy and how this redistribution actually closes this income gap in Malaysia, right? On my first point for today, I'm going to tell you, what the benefits and the legitimacy of this policy, right? Now, the goal of side opening government is to close or at least try to, shorten the income gap, right? Shorten the amount of money that a person earns when he's really, really poor or when a person is in an elite class, right? How? The income gap exists because I told you in my opening speech, right? That the circulation of income and money, right, only is only circulating in elite classes, right? Like from development projects, CEO jobs only go to the elite people in those classes, right? Now, we can't force companies to try to close this gap, but what we can do is, as the state, is use the power of taxation, because only us as the state have that power to tax people, right? And what does tax do? It absorbs money from the upper classes, and as the state of Malaysia, we're going to push it back to the lower classes. By doing this, we think that we push money and empower these lower classes financially, right? We let them and help them climb these social ladders. We let them lead better lives, right? Why is it legitimate? For two levels, right? One, we think that it's legitimate because it's the federal government's duty to always do this, right? It's a natural process of government, and it's in the nature of like a state like Malaysia to always be concerned with helping these lower classes. Where have we seen this? We've seen this in Felda, in FRIM, right? When we give free textbooks to particular schools, right? When we see one Malaysia stores are open to like sell groceries for 1 ringgit. These are all parallels to how the state is concerned for the well-being of the lower class, right? Now, we've seen that kind of like examples already, right? Is it actually 6 minutes? No, it's 4, right? Yeah. Because we've seen it in there, we believe that this kind of taxation actually is similar in nature, right? Because we've told you in my mechanism that the money that we're going to take is not just for fun. We're actually going to take this money and redistribute it to the lower classes. We think it's legitimate for that. But second, we also think it's legitimate because this tax, right, it's not just any other tax like income tax or GST tax, right? It's actually a different type of tax. It's a tax that is reasonably arguable, and we, like a lot of people wouldn't actually disagree with it. The rhetoric used by most like liberal capitalists against unfair taxation is this, right? Hey, it's my hard-earned money. You don't actually have the right to take it away. But in this case, it's not actually your hard-earned money. It's your father's lump sum that is passed to you, and the only thing you did to receive that lump sum is like via the birth lottery, right? Now, we think that doesn't mean we're going to take all that money of the tax, of the inheritance. We've already told you in the mechanism, it's going to be a reasonable amount of portion, right? Like a reasonable percentage that is on a case-by-case basis to take that amount of money from your inheritance and redistribute it to the poor. We think it's legitimate for that. At the end of the day, we think that the policies from these, that the benefits from our policy yield actually many, many benefits, right? We've told you the goal of our policy. We want to take money from the rich. We've done this in income tax. We're just doing it even more because we don't think that the problem is solved at all, right? We think that if we've done it in income tax, we should do it here, right? And we don't think that it harms the rich that much. I've drawn to you countless parallels to show you that indeed it is the nature of, especially the state of Malaysia, to be concerned with these lower classes. I've shown you that this policy specifically targets the rich, and I've provided to you a justification of why it's okay to tax the rich. We've done it in income taxes, but not just for fun. We don't just take this money for fun. I've told you for a good 2 minutes about the big benefits that we're going to do. We're going to take this money, we're going to redistribute it to the people at the lower classes and help them climb these social ladders. And lastly, I've shown to you, and we said that this is a unique tax. Taxing people's money that they didn't actually earn is actually, and only receive the money as a result of the birth lottery, is less harmful than taking somebody's money that they actually earned by themselves, right? And we've conceded from the get-go that yes, in the short term, no policy is perfect. Our policy does incur minor harms onto these elite classes, right? But we've told you that firstly, it doesn't harm them that much. We think it's something worth taking that kind of risk, right? Because we've told you that we see large amounts of benefits being yielded from this policy. We think we help and lift these poor people up from these unfair charters of the lower society. For all those reasons, we're very proud to propose.
And points of information definitely encouraged.
Sorry, during speech. Okay. We're making a few concessions here, right? We accept the economical benefits that they are arguing that they would garner from the taxation that you apply to these people. We do acknowledge the fact that when you tax the rich and you give it to the poor, then we say that yes, it's a kind of distribution of wealth that we would like to see in a situation where the social disparity is further apparent in the kind of society that we look at. But the problem here is that the way that you garner that profit from taxation, what kind of tax do you apply to the rich, that we are questioning in today's debate? That is the thing that is clearly lacking from side opening government today. Because they've been arguing on how the kind of tax that they're going to apply is inherited tax, where the difference here is not, inheritance tax is inherently not the same as income tax, right? How? Because number one, they argue on how the concept of birth lottery, right? How these rich individuals, they are born into rich families without their choice. They don't even know that they're going to be born into rich families, and how like the poor, they don't even know they're going to be born in a poor family because of the fact that it's random. Right? We say that this is a situation where birth lottery is beyond your choice. And when you tax someone on something that is beyond a person's choice, like the birth lottery, when you tax someone on their wealth that they don't even know that they're going to inherit, that's the question where we ask in them today's debate. How then you justify this tax? Right? Now, the implication here, yes, we do agree that you want to imply their tax towards the inherited wealth. Yeah, we're okay with that. But the problem here that you haven't analyzed on the implications towards the rich and how the perception that they would have towards the implementation of this tax. No, thank you. Now, the problem here that you don't understand is that yes, the fact that you will distribute these kind of taxes directly to the poor, this is the kind of thing that will create a negative narrative towards the poor, because it will further then disincentivize the participation of the rich in terms of helping the poor in the end of the day. And I'll explain to you on a few levels of analysis. No, but number one, I'll explain to you on how when you apply the kind of tax without the choice of these rich individuals, right? Now, we are okay with you taxing these rich individuals based on the income tax system that we currently have, but we're not okay with you taxing them on an inherited wealth because of the fact that they don't get to choose to get these inherited assets in the first place. No, thank you. But the kind of impetus that they will get when they are being taxed in this situation is that they're going to be the kind of tax that the government do is simply arbitrary, just because they are born in a rich family. Simply just because they are born in a rich family, just because they have that inherited wealth, they're going to be taxed upon that. So when you use that money that you gain on them, these kind of impetus that you create onto the rich people would then remove the incentive, or maybe like causes the counter narrative towards the rich to actually participate actively in helping the poor in the first place, because the money that you use is arbitrarily taken from the rich and given directly to the poor. This is the kind of situation where you're going to cause a negative narrative towards the poor, whether the money that they get are not justified, because the kind of taxes that they're profiting from are the kind of taxes that these side cannot justify, because you're giving it based on a simple reason, because of the birth lottery, because of the fact that you're born in a rich family. We're going to tax you because of that. We're going to tax on the inherited wealth that you have. We're going to tax it and give it to the poor. What then is the implication that this shows towards the rich? What then is the impetus that will be accepted by the rich, right? Yes, I'll listen to you.
So your negative narrative assumes that we're incurring huge enough harms onto these rich people. But we've told you in my opening speech, right, that they're not huge harms, and especially not huge enough harms to deter these people away.
All right, I skipped the fact that it may not be as much, but that also engage with your fact where you're gonna pull out the circulation of money from the rich, where taxation only goes so far. But the question here is not just about the amount of money that you tax these people, but it's about why do you tax them. It's about the tax that you apply to these people. The kind of things, yes, you get taxed for the littlest of things, but the kind of perception that you get for these kind of taxes, that's the social impact that we are questioning here. Because the rational calculus here is that they're arguing that they're gonna tax these rich individuals, to get economic benefits. Then they're going to tax these people for a very reasonable, perhaps even a small amount of money to gain out from the inherited wealth. Yes, we say that you're going to do this, but then the implementation of the tax itself is the kind of perception that it's the kind of negative perception that you give towards the rich, which will then disincentivize the people to actually help the poor in the end of the day, because the participation, because of the fact that they are being forced into giving the money towards the rich. It's not an informed choice, right? Because you are applying a tax just because of the fact that it's birth lottery. It's not an informed choice. We clearly say that a lot of people, especially the rich in this situation, where they don't get to choose, they don't get to know why is it that they're being taxed in the first place. So we say that at the expense of a very minute tax benefit that you can get through income taxes, which is clearly justifiable, at the minute expense of that economic benefit, you're going to lose the social participation of these rich individuals in terms of helping the poor in the first place. We say that this is the problem that they don't understand today's debate, right? They need to understand how exactly that we need to help the poor, not just by giving them economic incentives. Yes, we do agree that your taxation will give them economic incentive, but at what expense? The expense of that, the flip side of their case today is that the kind of perception that the poor would have then is that they're getting money from unjustified tax, right? They're getting money from the rich individuals just because the rich are born in the rich families, right? So this is the kind of things that further widens the gap in terms of creating more social disparity that you're so much trying to solve. Closing.
Exactly. The birth lottery means they don't deserve to inherit wealth by pure virtue of their faith. It's not a punishment if the government is equalizing the playing field for everyone.
Now here's the point. When you argue that they don't deserve to get these wealth, right? But they don't deserve to get these wealth. But the question is, they don't even have a choice in determining their birth lottery in the first place, because of the fact that it's beyond their choice. We said that they don't have an informed choice here to be taxed on this decision here. We argue, yes, you have economic incentive in doing so, but in terms of justifying, you still have a lot more alternative in terms of taxing the rich, like income taxes, how business taxes are being applied. But this is the kind of thing that you cannot justify because it's arbitrarily given just because they're rich. Just because of the fact that birth lottery is random, that's the reason why we say that we should not tax these people because they are born in the rich and in the rich family. Because I've already talked to you on a few levels, right? I've talked to you on how, like, because you're taxing them on a non-justified basis, it's going to repel these rich individuals to actually participate more in helping the poor in the first place, because that thing's already here in the situation that we have, because they are being taxed for reasonable reasons and not just because they inherit the wealth. Now, because of the kind of agreement, because of the kind of consent, because of the kind of informed taxes that they're being charged upon, we said that they don't have negative perception towards the poor, even if you use that tax money to give it to the poor. But on the other side, when you use unjustified taxes and you give that money directly to the poor, this is the point where you create negative perception from the rich towards the poor, which will then disincentivizes the kind of participation that we truly need to remove the concept of social disparity in society between the rich and also the poor. So to help the poor in this side, we say you should side with side opening opposition. Thank you.
I take the lead of the speech, now call Deputy Prime Minister.
Here.
Mr. Speaker, the fact that 1%, the top 1% wealth of this country is more than the 90% of the majority nation, we think that's extremely problematic to begin with, right? We think that form of inequality in itself is something the state has to step in, because at that rate, we think the economy, the future of the economy's prosperity will be hugely affected, right? But before that, right, this debate is about a trade-off, right? It's a trade-off that needs to exist, right? Whether do we then still penalize the rich for their inheritance and for their birth lottery, to use that money to then give it to the poor, and the trade-off, and then I'll argue that in my speech, right? But first of all, two rebuttals coming from the other side, right? First is birth lottery, something that we should penalize the rich for, and secondly, this negative narrative that we're going to empower, disfranchise the rich, right? First of all, on the birth lottery choice, we think, yes, precisely that definition, the analysis, that rhetoric that he used, because it's random, we don't think it's fair that just because I was born to a rich family, I get access to education, facilities, things that will determine my future, and just because I was born in the poor poverty cycle, a person who is poor in a poverty, my entire future is then diminished and gone to begin with, right? That randomness and that unprecision of the random birth lottery is something that's why we think the state needs to step in to control it, to minimize that randomness and that equality. Precisely, if you think it's unfair to tax the rich for their birth lottery, you shouldn't have a problem if you're redistributing the wealth, the benefits that they are getting into this poor. By that definition, then birth lottery wouldn't even be a problem to begin with, because whatever benefits you're getting from the birth lottery is then redistributed to the poor, right? But second level analysis, yes.
What do you think the poor's money comes from?
What do you think the poor's money comes? Sorry?
They get the jobs. Who do you think, who provides the poor's job?
Yeah, we think everyone provides, the government, the state, and I don't know how that's relevant. But let's move on to the second rebuttal, right? Does this send a negative narrative to the rich, and does this disfranchise the poor? We think number one, it doesn't, right? We think any poor people will be more than happy to receive this money, right? That's why we have things like welfare. We have things like affirmative action, give free public healthcare, free education, because the poor wants somebody to help them to come out of this and reach the economic mobility, right? We don't think any poor will come out and say, look, we want to reject your money because it comes from the rich, right? But secondly, on the idea, because we think there's a huge contradiction coming from their side. They were okay with income tax, but they were not okay with inheritance tax. We think it's a huge contradiction, because what the exact narrative and rhetoric income tax does is the same thing as inheritance tax, right? Because you tax the higher if you earn more than 1 million, your percentage tax gets higher, like 50%. If you earn less, you don't even get taxed to begin with. And that extra money, tax revenue, goes into, and is then redistributed to everybody, right? Like welfare, healthcare, education, infrastructure. It's the same rhetoric like GST. Things like GST taxes the rich because they buy more products, the consumer products, right? So we think that rhetoric doesn't exist to begin with, right? But even if, right, best case scenario, we think the rich isn't doing enough to help the poor and to help the situation for them to be a trade-off. We think the rich isn't saintly, or they don't have enough charity organizations or CSR projects that has a huge benefit to these poor people. So we don't think, even if we piss them off or they're angry, we don't think it's going to be beneficial to our society. On a second level, right, even if best case scenario, we think it's a trade-off. We think it's extremely fine for us, for this rich to be hate on us or to hate the government and, hate the poor people, because we think on the long term, maybe 5 years from now, they'll be upset. But long term, when they see these people, poverty slowly being eradicated, people from the rural areas slowly having education, having better opportunities, having better labor forces, things that they can hire. We think at the end of the day, the trade-off is much better because we don't think government policies only cater to a specific target of people. It caters for a majority target of people, right? But let's move on to my points. No, before that, yes, yeah.
Yeah, your goals in achieving and helping the poor can also be achieved with the current system that we have. But by applying this unjustified tax just because they are rich, the point when you piss off these rich individuals to actually help the poor, that's the point where you don't get kind of participation.
Okay, first of all, Mr. Speaker, it's not enough, right? We have income tax, we have GST. The reason why we're implementing inheritance tax is because it's a huge imperative, right? Like our national deficit is so huge, right? When you have a huge national deficit, the first things you're going to cut is welfare, and that's going to affect the poor immediately, right? But even if I've told you my entire rebuttals how it's fine, even if worst case scenario we piss off the rich people, we think it's a perfect narrative, right? But let's move on to my point. I'm going to talk to you how now this will socially engineer society's mindset to number one, to climb up the economic mobility, and number two, to eradicate the idea of birth lottery, right? Because we think that birth lottery plays a huge part within society, especially the lower class income, right? How they feel extremely demotivated just because they're born in a poor family, they don't have the access, they don't have the education, right? They automatically think that this is a vicious poverty cycle, right? They automatically always they either take up their SME, their small family business, and sell roti canai or nasi lemak and things like that, right? We think it's a narrative, it's a cycle that goes within these poor people, right? We think it's an unfair advantage to begin with, right? Because why? Things like when you have inheritance, what sort of an unfair advantage are we talking about? Things like lifestyle choices, education, healthcare, facilities, and accessibility to goods, right? We think that first of all, the reason why these poor people are in the lower income bracket is because the state has failed them, right? The state has failed to provide proper education, proper welfare for them to at least have a minimum wage or at least have a middle class lifestyle, right? If not lavish, at least sustainable lifestyle, right? We think because the state has failed, we think it's more imperative that the state steps in to solve this principally unjustified, because it's morally abhorrent, as they said. It's birth lottery, right? It's random. How can you determine a person's future based on what he inherited and where he was born, right? We think it's extremely detrimental, and that's the reason why the state needs to step in to minimize the sort of casualties, right? We think the state needs to improve some sort of equality within the state. Now, how does this help, right? We think when the state pumps in that money that we take from inheritance tax, you'll then be able to distribute things like small SME loans, right? Things that helps these people facilitate their healthcare system. We think all these extra added benefits that the state can only provide through our side, we think this socially engineers the poor's mindset, right? Why? Because we think now the government is actively taking a step that, look, we're not just abandoning you because you're poor. We think there's a narrative that exists, right? We're taxing this rich. We don't think it's fair for this rich to just go off or live a parasite just because they're rich, right? We think that's the sort of message that you send to people. And we think this empowers that narrative that they're not just a liability, that there's chance for them to climb up social mobility, right? But more than that, right, we think there's more incentive, because what happens under our paradigm is when you reduce income inequality, essentially the lower class people are going to climb up the ladder and they're going to be middle class, right? This is a good narrative because it's going to benefit the rich eventually. How, right? Because when people are better, like they have better jobs and they're higher economic prosperity, what's going to happen now is people are going to have a higher purchasing power, right? They're going to have more money, right? They don't want to be working on like farms and things like that. They'll have better jobs, better facilities, right? When you have higher purchasing power, who dominates the market? Obviously the rich people, right? We think they'll be able to buy your products. The demand, minute part of society, is going to be a huge part of society, right? We think there's more profit. All these benefits is going to specifically help the rich people, right? My company is going to be better because I have a huge pool of people to buy my products. But more better, we think it's going to help the government essentially, because look, when you have a society that the disparity isn't so huge where everybody is equal, we think that you'll attract foreign direct investments, right? Companies will now start coming. Why? Because your general public, your consumer confidence is quite good, right? People are willing to spend, people's economic prosperity is there, right? For all those reasons, we think side OG takes to this debate, right? Thank you.
Thank the Prime Minister for his comments. Now to conclude, the ask of the leader of
All right. Here.
Yes, coming from side opposition, we do consider the fact that government, yes, their policies are going to help the lower class people by climbing up the ladder to get more success in the future, how it helps poverty and stuff like that. But I see that there's a flaw inside government where they totally neglect on the impression or on the perception that will be possible if they implement this new policy. Now, the main question is it fairly equal to actually just implement this kind of unjustified taxes on this rich people just because they are randomly like, okay, I'm born in a rich family, then I have to I have to give tax to these people who like suddenly they just get my money. No, they totally neglected the fact that there is an informed choice, and we say that it is wrong. Now, coming from side government, they totally cannot differentiate between what is income tax and also what is inherited tax. Sit down. Income tax, they earn the money and they are informed that okay, this tax is because of what they earn. So it varies it varies from one person to another based on that person's profession and job. But when we talk about inherited tax, it means that you have no choice. You just have to give the money to these people without any Yes.
Ma'am, the recently implemented GST tax isn't actually sending good narratives to anyone at all. Not only to the poor, but also to the rich, right? Now, according to your LO's principles, we shouldn't have GST at all because it sends negative connotations. Should we have GST or not? Defend your LO's case.
Okay. I don't think GST is relevant in this debate because that wasn't brought up by my LO. Now, the question is, okay, let's look into the social disparity, social disparity that can occur if we implement this. They've been prioritizing about what may happen to these rich people, how it will how it can help these poor people, and how even though it's forced, but then it's a little bit tax. It's just a little tax, but how far is the extension? Does this policy help these poor people? Because you have to look into the nature when you are forced into doing something that you have no choice in doing it, and you are forced to do it. Okay, the main issue that the opposition wants to bring out here is that when you are forced into doing something, it will of course create tangible harm to these poor people. Okay, what are the terms we're talking about? We're talking about perception and this social disparity that might occur to them, because when you force something onto these rich people, it will create resentment on these poor people. Because we have to consider the fact that yes, they are born in a poor family, but the rich people still has the rights to have the choice to donate. Because the tangible harm that might occur if we implement this policy is when they repel from participation. Yes, now we have charities, we have corporations that donates money and help these poor people. But why are we taking away that possibility when we implement this policy?
Ma'am, the justification of income taxation, which functions almost parallel to our policy, is one, there is sustainable harm the state and people are willing to incur. But two, there are more benefits that are being produced from income tax and our tax.
Okay, yes, we can sit to that fact, but we do not say that inherited tax, they are not informed, they have no choice. Just because my dad's rich, I have to give out my money to these poor people. Now we have to look at the possibilities that might happen in the future, right? If I come from a poor family, then I get money from these unknown rich people, how am I gonna be treated in school? We have to accept these possibilities. We don't want to fine, they come up with benefits economically, but when we go into the social engineering, how does it help these poor people? They're gonna socially, they're gonna be discriminated and alienated, and these things that we have to we shouldn't take it as a risk.
Madam, would you principally impose a tax on investments?
Okay, yes. Okay, I'm sorry, I cannot answer that. Okay, the main idea here is we want to prevent these poor people, because yes, you say that taxation can help them, improve their lives, but how far? How far can it help? Is taxation sustainable? Because when we talk about sustainability, right, they are forced into doing it, and the other sources of like helping these poor people will definitely be taken away because of the resentment that has been produced because of this forced taxation. No, because we have the fact that yes, they are born in a rich family, and the fact that these taxes are informed choices, and we say that it's so very problematic for this policy to be implemented. Now, the reason why opposition say that this policy shouldn't be implemented because it will further widen the gap, not go against what the government said, like widen the gap. It will definitely widen the social gap because like I said just now, the negative narrative that will be implied on these poor people shouldn't be happening if we implement this policy. Sorry. Okay. So now, questions that we have to answer in this debate, right? How far is the benefit of this inherited tax, right? Because we say, yes, it helped, but how far can it go? How is it sustainable? How is it going to be sustainable to help these poor people, not just economically, but socially? Now, that's one thing that opening failed to clarify in their case, right? They only focus on economic, on financially helping and aiding these poor people, but what about socially? The negative perceptions that will definitely occur when these elite people will definitely outcast and aid poor people that will harm their future. So yeah, I'm proud to oppose.
The purpose of taxation is not just to fulfill social rights like what happened in the opening debate. Taxes are also a tool of the economy to create more efficient financial structures, and that will be the unique perspective that closing government will bring to you in this debate. Two extensions. Number one, we're going to tell you why inheritance tax is an incentive for the maximization of utilization of resources within an economy. Number two, we're going to tell you why progressive taxation and income is a model and why it must be supplemented by strong framework of inheritance tax. But before I go on to those two very economic things that what MIDP wanted, let's go to three main rebuttals. Number one, they say they shouldn't punish those who couldn't choose. We have two responses. The first response is exactly the fact that people couldn't choose where they're born means that we must tax them. Otherwise, some people will be born poor, some people will be born rich, and the government is doing absolutely nothing to equalize that playing field. Because they didn't choose to be rich means they would miss out on being rich because you guys could have very easily been born in a poor family. And in that scenario, you wouldn't defend for the poor. I have a right to be rich because I didn't choose to be born in a poor family. That obviously doesn't go both ways. To equalize that playing field, we must empower economic opportunities for the poor by giving them welfare and deprioritize economic rights of the rich, right? And we say, to make it clear, they are not forcing rich people to give up their money. We're not forcing these children to give up their money. We're forcing them to give up the money of their parents, which they did not directly earn in any way. And that's completely fine because you're not supposed to be born in a rich family if we're to properly empower the right to equality. And they're assuming that we are able to empower the poor by giving them more opportunities while still consolidating the rights of the rich. We think these two paradigms are completely mutually exclusive, and therefore you have to defend victimizing the right of the poor. How so? Because when we empower the rights of the rich now have a financial ability to control the financial rights of every other economic classes within society. Because the rich people, they are the employers, therefore they control the wages of their employees. They control how much benefits they get. And the more they give to the rich class, to the lower incomes and middle incomes, the more they lose as a rich community. So therefore, you have an incentive to suppress the wages of other economic classes, and that's when you victimize the rights of the poor, because social mobility is not a real right, because the rich under your model gets to continuously consolidate their wealth, and therefore giving the rich rights means you victimize the rights of the poor. The second response is that they say the singular reason why we implement this is just because of the birth lottery. That's highly untrue, as if opening government didn't speak. They defended social rights. And what closing government was going to do is give you economic rights, Mr. Speaker, and why we have massive economic reasons to also defend this taxation model, not just because of the birth lottery. The second rebuttal that they had, we're going to create negative perception from the rich. We have two responses. Number one, if this harm is really significant, you want to protect it, then you shouldn't be okay with progressive income tax. Literally every harm that you wanted to avoid also applies in the model where we continuously tax the rich, because the richer you are, the more you sacrifice. So by right, you should be okay with full free carte blanche blown right by the rich, and obviously you're also not okay with that, therefore you concede to us. The second response, which is these people are gonna leave and take away their capital and etc. We think this is very unlikely to happen, because when they move their businesses out of Malaysia, they forget that Malaysia is the most viable market for any growing economy. We're one of 12 nations who have the most sustainable economic growth for the past 30 years. So when they move away their businesses because they don't like our taxation laws, they're also losing their export market and a huge market pool where people have massive purchasing power because are having more income and more businesses. So we think these businesses have long-term incentive to stay and not bring away their capital outside of Malaysia, because they have much more net benefit by staying in with their capital. Lastly, benefits of inheritance tax. This is what came in the deputy speech. Aside from that, it was just a bunch of repetition from the first speaker. They said that money that we get from this inheritance tax is not sustainable, without actually explaining to why it's not sustainable. We think that's a blatantly untrue statement. As long as we have a steady flow of people continuously becoming rich and businesses making money, therefore it's the most sustainable method of getting income, Madam Chair, Mr. Speaker, because people who are rich means there always be groups of people to tax. And the Malaysians' current economic stature, what we're going to do is allow more economic opportunities for other people to become rich, and therefore we have a wider group of people to tax. Therefore, it becomes more sustainable, our model, not just tax financial elites. Now we have a 20% of financial elites to tax, and that's far more sustainable than any model that they have. Two extensions from my speech. Number one, let's talk about inheritance tax as an incentive to maximize utilization of resources. But before that, any POIs? Perfect. Two levels to this first extension. Number one, what is the problem? We think people who are born into wealth develop an attitude of complacency, and what happens is rich people sit on their wealth, because when you're born into wealth, what happens with younger generations is they live their lives on dividends. They take very minimal financial risk. They don't take education seriously. All they have to do is continue the family business and you will still be rich. Why is this a structural harm in the economy that we want to avoid? Because the amount of money circulating within the economic structure is finite. So if we don't use that money, we just put it in bank accounts. So we have a whole bunch of money that's just missing from the economy. That's money that could have been invested by creating more businesses, more jobs, and multiplying financial transactions within the economy. And governments don't just print out money to have more money in circulation. That's what puts governments into recessions. So it's the second level. Why is this a bad thing? How does inheritance tax alter the spending pattern of the rich? For two reasons. A, that is not invested is money that is lost to the rich community, because investments are exempted from all kinds of inheritance taxes. So now is the kind of model between freehold leases versus limited leases, because when you have freehold leases, all these abandoned projects happen because you don't make a loss when you sit on your wealth, because that is money that you're not incurring. But when you only hold a property for 99 years, the incentive is to maximize the kind of development that you can get with that amount of money that is limited. So the rich now has an incentive to further invest and further create businesses and employment for other people. But B, we cut down significantly and what people can inherit. What happens to this to these sons and daughters who will leave them with a comfortable amount of capital, but they no longer have sustainable wealth. So they need to make the most of whatever little money that's being left by their parents. So now they have to offset the costs of inheritance tax. So they have to develop more business projects to fully maximize the small wealth that is being given by their parents, and therefore maximize their financial standing in the economy. We maximize the utilization of resources in Malaysia. Secondly, taxation failed. And you can see that it fails clearly because we now need to implement the GST, because clearly income tax don't work for two reasons. Number one, income tax is an opt-in model. That means income earners must declare their profit. But the thing is, you have legitimate means to offset that declaration. You can use social businesses as a vehicle of income, and therefore you don't have to declare taxes. You can create multiple companies and then spread your revenue elsewhere, so the amount that you pay is less than, Mrs. Speaker. You can invest it in other places, and therefore you also don't need to declare your income. income. Versus under our model, wealth must always be registered. Property must be registered. Shares must be registered. Land must be registered. Companies must be registered. Therefore, your wealth must always be attributed to a person, and therefore we have more things to tax, and therefore it's far more sustainable. But secondly, it's much harder to abuse because land and property have immutable characteristics in which you cannot move them freely around like money, which is very easy to abuse and very easy to transfer, whereas all of these land and property and wealth have a lot more legal, financial hurdles to changing, and therefore this model is far more sustainable. Income tax will not do it. In order to forward in Malaysia, the side of government of Malaysia must implement inheritance tax for the rich.
Okay, from our side, we are not saying that the rich shouldn't give the poor money. We know that the poor still there, and we should give them money because they are poor, because they need help. And and as for the rich, we need to give them money, to give them financial support for them to do something really useful for their future. And we are not saying that this action is wrong, but we are saying that as for poor, because they are poor, so we cannot just give them money simply. We cannot let them to rely on the poor, to rely on the rich, to just rely on giving them the money, but don't give them any developments for them, further developments for them to change their life, to change their future, to become more bright. We just want to say that because we cannot let the poor to rely on the rich. On the contrary, we should give them opportunities to give them the chance to change their future. Because we know that 20% of the people are rich and of the people are poor. But we also know that because of this 20%, they have more money, and they can control most of the money, and they can use this money to many different ways. For example, they can set up the factories. They can hire the poor people to their company to give them a chance, or they can set up some companies, some organizations, and to widen the staffs to all their companies. And this is what they can do for the poor, but they cannot just simply give the money to the poor and let the poor to rely on their money. And it is not a long-term goal for them to deal with the poor people, and it is not a very effective way for them to do this.
Before that, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, they can still do everything that you're proposing under our policy because we're not taking all that inheritance away.
But we are saying that because the rich have the most of the money, and we know that as for person, if we have the money and if we have some powerful things, we always think about our self benefits from the front. We will not just at the beginning just give out the money for the people. We need to have the individual developments for ourselves at first. Before to give the money to people, we need to have this. We need to have a good condition and fulfill our development, so that we can help others from prevent from the poor, and we can always put our benefits from the front. And if all the things based on this, and we can help others. So our goal is that our goal is a bit just the same, to develop the economy, to help the poor, but our way is to put the rich to put the rich on where the state they have, and inspire them to develop the economy. But we also need to give the poor some financial support, and we also need to give them some help for them to become higher, just like can catch up with the rich. And then when they are equal, we now can get the tax from them. And so before this, at the beginning, we should let the rich to develop themselves and to develop their individual. And then because we know most of money come from the rich, and the rich can help the poor to escape from the poor. So first we need to give them. We cannot take away their money. We need to give them the money. We need to keep them the money at first. Sorry, we need to keep the money at the beginning and let them to develop and to satisfy their individuals, so they can have the further developments for others people and for the country, whole country. If they don't benefit from themselves, so how can they help others? So how can we guarantee them to help others or to help the country development in the future? So our goal is to let rich to develop and give the poor relative policy to help them to escape from the poor, but not just give them the money simply. We know that if we take the money from rich, it means deprive their rights and deprive their chance to develop themselves. And for example, they don't have enough money to set up an organization or set up other companies. So if they don't need to do these things, so they don't have the ability to do more further developments for the poor and even for the country. Sorry, if we take the money from them away, it means that we deprive their rights to develop the economy and deprive the chances for developing their individuals' future. So if they don't have the individual development, how can we guarantee them can help other peoples? So we firmly believe that we can before we force them to give us the tax, we should first give them the chance to develop themselves and to help the other further people to develop their future. So we think that we cannot just catch their money away. We should help them, and we should let them to develop and not hand out their inheritance tax. If they know that in the future the government will take away their inheritance tax, how will they think? They will think that our money will take away by the government. So why do I need to struggle for my life? Why I need to still keep this money? Why I need to leave this money for my children or why I need to leave this to the people what I really need to help. So we think that we cannot before force them to give us the tax. We need to give them chance to develop the country, to help the people. So that's all. Thank you.
Now called government with wrap up.
Mr. Speaker, in my speech, I will prove two things. Firstly, why this policy is morally justifiable. And OPT has already conceded that this policy is morally justifiable because they conceded that it will actually help the poor. But secondly, I'm going to tell you why this is practically brilliant. I'm really surprised that we haven't done this in Malaysia yet. After listening, I think probably she should join Puteri UMNO and actually fight for this policy in Malaysia, ladies and gentlemen. But before that, two responses towards the closing opposition. The first argument that they ran is that the rich is important to consolidate their wealth because they create jobs for the poor. We have three responses to this. The first one is the POI that was raised brilliantly by this handsome gentleman, that if we are not taxing all of people's inheritance, ladies and gentlemen, which means that the rich will still have some money to create that investment. The response is that there will be a natural incentive for the rich or MNCs to create jobs for the poor through market forces, demand and supply. Malaysia is a developing country and it's a vibrant economy where people can come and get cheap labor, where cost of production is always low, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, we think that job creation by the rich for the poor will always exist. But last response is that everyone will always strive to do better. That means even if you're taxed, it doesn't mean that you don't want to open a company and mobilize yourself even if you're rich. If you're rich, you always want to be richer because money is always not enough. And Mai can attest to that with her shopping habits, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, they said that dependency will take place. If the poor is getting money, therefore the poor will be lazy. We don't think so. Firstly, the poor will always have a natural incentive to mobilize themselves because it sucks being poor, ladies and gentlemen. You don't get to get your Louis Vuitton bag or eat at an expensive restaurant, for example, ladies and gentlemen. But we think if you want to encourage a competitive environment where the poor fight in order to mobilize themselves, we think that there is an asymmetry of power at the moment where the poor are unable to compete with the rich because of the unfortunate, they are victims of circumstance, ladies and gentlemen, the unfortunate circumstance that they're in. If you want the poor to be able to compete, at least we need to balance the asymmetry of power. And to do that, we need inheritance tax to allow the poor to have education so that they can compete, to allow the poor to be able to access health care so that they can be healthy to compete, ladies and gentlemen. All these things have to make sense because under the status quo, we don't have enough money to balance the asymmetry. Now, on to the opening. They argued two things. The first thing is there will be a negative perception towards the poor. We questioned them, what is the harm of this negative perception? There was no analysis whatsoever on this negative harm, negative perception. The only analysis that came from DLO was this whole idea of how poor kids will be discriminated in school. We don't think young children understand the complexity of taxation in order to actualize their discrimination in school, firstly. But secondly, we don't think that they are principally coherent because we think we have things such as progressive taxation. We have things such as taxing the rich a lot more, ladies and gentlemen. If that is true, always be stigmatized. But our second response is the poor already possess a negative perception under the status quo. We question how our policy will make that perception worse. Our third response is that at least when the poor gets more wealth from the rich, they will be able to combat this negative perception when they are able to socially mobilize, ladies and gentlemen, to change things and to interact with the rich people in order to change mindsets. Under the status quo, they are unable to do so. Therefore, in a comparison, we think the negative perception that the rich has towards the poor is far worse under the status quo because the rich can never be able to change that perception because they're stuck in the vicious cycle of poverty. Yeah. Secondly, they said that it is unfair to rich kids. They said that rich kids did not choose to be rich. Therefore, it is unfair to tax them. This is a paradox, ladies and gentlemen, because it is equally unfair for poor kids to be poor as well. So they didn't choose to be poor. If indeed an individual didn't choose to be rich and they think it's unfair for them to take away the wealth that is accumulated from their parents, it doesn't make sense because if they have a sentiment against not choosing to be rich, they won't have a problem with even 100% tax on inheritance, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, we think that principally, inheritance tax is more justified than any other tax, which includes income tax and GST. Why is this so? Because in inheritance tax, you don't have an intrinsic right over that property. That property was given to you free, right? It was given to you by your parents. Or if your parents like another person and suddenly your name appeared in the will, you acquire that property. So it is unfair, at least for income tax, you own that property, you work for it, right? In inheritance tax, it is devoid of effort, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Therefore, there is more reason on the part of government to tax these things, to tax this property, ladies and gentlemen, and we think on the principle justified. But secondly, let's look at what creates more equitable distribution of resources in Malaysia. Mai already told you that when it comes to GST or income tax, it is uncertain in terms of its revenue because obviously the rich will have better lawyers, will have better knowledge and stuff like that, which enables them to evade tax or allows them to move money around, ladies and gentlemen. GST is also uncertain revenue because it is dependent on people spending their money, ladies and gentlemen. Or income tax is uncertain as well because it stops when you retire. But when it comes to property, it is an immutable character. It can't change. The property is there, it is registered. If the land costs $1 million, then we will progressively tax that land. And we think that is a fairer way in order for us to redistribute income in Malaysia. Secondly, I asked the people or not, you will tax investment tax. And this is, we will tax investments. They said yes. The reason for them saying yes, I presume, is that they don't want money to sit in bank accounts. They want money to circulate within the economy. That's the same thing Maya argued. Because if you have wealth that's given to you free, it is more likely that you will sit on that money, or you will sell that property and take all your money, if you're Malay, put it in ASB or put it in Tabung Haji and makan dividend, ladies and gentlemen. That is unfair because money doesn't serve me. That's the same reason why under the status quo we tax investments, because we don't want people to keep their money. At the end of this debate, we have to ask ourselves a question. Is in a context of developing country or in a context of distribution of resources so screwed up like Malaysia, we divide and conquer, Chinese owning property, and then we try to fix it with affirmative the Daims and all the Malay elites were owning property. What's the fair way for us to distribute this income, ladies and gentlemen? Let's hit the rich where it counts, where they love their children, they want to give these children and consolidate their dynasty, ladies and gentlemen. This is where we hit them the most. This is where we fairly distribute property. We're supremely proud to propose.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today, the opposition side, our stance is that we think that the government shouldn't give the money to the poor directly, but we should provide more jobs, more opportunities for the poor people so that they can pursue their future by their own. So before that, one rebuttal to the government side. They mentioned that only some little percent of inheritance taxation is levied to the rich people. But actually, what we think is that inheritance is very large of those rich people. So actually, the taxation will be large. So actually, the taxation will directly lessen the accumulation of the property, the accumulation of the capital of the rich people. So, but we know that large accumulation is needed to set up a national brand such as LV, Apple. So we think that the rich people is the main force to stimulate the national economy. So I'll come to my constructive part. Two collections of today's debate. Firstly, we are arguing about the effects of the implementation of inheritance taxation. The government side, they think that implementation of inheritance taxation will lessen the inequality of the rich and the poor, so that we can realize social equality. But we opposition side, we think that by levy the taxation, we will lessen the rich people's capital accumulate, the economy will corrupt. So I will explain to you why rich people's why the accumulation of capital is so important to the economy. So the rich people, which takes up 20% of the population of the society, they are the main force to accumulate capital. And the poor people, which take up 80% of the population of the society, actually, they don't have the ability to accumulate capital in our society. Why? Because they have very low income, they will have very high angle efficiency, so they will pay most of their money to cover the basic life expenses. They will use their money to buy food, to buy clothes, to buy some necessity of their life. So they don't have money, they don't have extra money to buy other products such as iPhone, such as iPad or TV. So they don't have the ability to stimulate the consumption of the society. So actually, it is the rich who was to facilitate the whole economy of the country. So firstly, why is so important for the accumulation of the rich people? Firstly, we think that the rich people, they can develop factories or manufacturers so that they can create job opportunities to the poor people. So that actually the poor people, their money comes from the rich people. That is why I raised the POI to the opening government, but unfortunately they didn't understand me. So secondly, we think that the rich people can invest in state-owned business, in some infrastructure such as the schools, the hospitals, and the shopping malls. So actually, that's why our economy can develop. And thirdly, they will consume products. They will consume extra luxury products to so that they can contribute to the economy. But this part of consumption, the poor people, they fail to do so because they don't have extra money, so they don't have the ability to stimulate the economy. So fourth, the people, they turn back to the society, and they will set up some benevolent funds to contribute to the society and give the money back to the society. So actually, there are three main methods to facilitate the economy. Firstly is the export. So this is helped by the rich people to set up factories and manufacturers. And secondly is the investment, because the rich people have extra money, so they have the ability to invest other factories. So thirdly is the consumption, because they have money, so they can consume other products instead of only basic life expenses. Opening.
First of all, we're not going to tax all the rich, right? The money, all and the entire money until the products, right? We think they'll still be able to stimulate the economy via the businesses, their investments, and etc. Right? But secondly, if all the money and give it to your poor, the probability of that happening is way less than under our side, where we directly take the money and give it to the poor. Right? So then why are you not okay with our side?
I've already told you by my rebuttal that actually the inheritance is so large, so the taxation only 1% or 2% will be a large quantity of money taken from the rich people. So actually the deprivation of capital accumulation is very large. So, and those big brands, those very big business, they need a lot of money to set up. So actually, just a little percent of taxation can do very harm to the accumulation process. Sorry. So I want to tell you one example of how the rich can help the country to develop the economy, so that the poor people will benefit from the economy. It is the Chinese reform and open. And in China, we set up special economic zones so that those special economic zones that have an advantage in capital in resources, and just like the rich, and they complete the whole economic system in China. And so that when the economy grow, mature, back, they will distribute resources to other poor regions, so that the whole country can develop the circle. The rich people system. So this is what Malaysia is still developing country. They only can be set up by the rich people. And also, our opposition side, we think that there are other alternatives to lessen the gap between the rich and the poor. And for example, we can provide some equal education, so the poor people can have opportunities to start business, and we can give more legislation, right? We can increase the quotas of the poor people, so that they have more right to decide their things to do some beneficial for themselves. So
based on my points, I still believe that our bench take an advantage of this debate. Thank you.
Thank all the people who agreed. You guys can punch the floor, give us sorry.
No, it's fine.